Okay, good morning kids. Today we will do this poem titled The Patriot by Robert Browning. Okay, so first I would like to just talk a bit in brief about Robert Browning. Well, Robert Browning was a British poet and he was considered a foremost Victorian poet. And the one thing that Robert Browning is famous for, he had achieved a mastery of a certain form of poetry called the Dramatic Monologue. And Robert Browning's father wanted to be a scholar, he wanted to be an artist, but he couldn't quite fulfill his dreams. So Robert Browning's father supported his son in the pursuit of his son's dreams. And so Robert Browning's father had a huge library. He was a cultured man. His mother was into music. So he was tutored at home extensively. And by the age of 14 years, he was well versed with Greek, he was well versed with Latin, he was well versed with French. And a very interesting thing being that from a very young age, Robert Browning wanted to be a poet, for which his parents supported him. And he was never really interested in any other profession. And so Robert Browning is very famous for his works titled Bells and Pomegranates, Men and Women, The Book and the Ring, and the poems for which he is very famous for. In fact, these poems are available on the net. Please go through it. Fra Lippo Lippi, Andrea del Sarto, Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover. So he is very famous for these poems. Okay, so now we will just go through this particular poem, The Patriot by Robert Browning. But before that, let me just explain to you what is it that we mean by a dramatic monologue. Okay, now a dramatic monologue is basically when one monologue. What is the meaning of the word monologue? Is basically when there is one speaker speaking. Okay, so dramatic monologue is basically the speech by a speaker, a single speaker that comprises the whole poem. Okay, and it's spoken in a specific situation. Remember that, kids, and at a critical moment. Okay, and the word drama in the word dramatic is not about the drama that's taking place outside the speaker, but it's the drama that's taking place in the mind of the speaker. So a dramatic monologue gives us a glimpse, gives us an understanding of the character and the temperament of the speaker. Okay, but a dramatic monologue gets a bit tricky, and I will get to that later on. So do remember that this particular poem is written in the form of a dramatic monologue. Okay, so now to begin with, let's look at the title, The Patriot. Okay, so the subtitle of this particular poem is An Old Story. Now why an old story is because this particular poem is about the rise and fall of heroes. And it's also about the fickleness of public opinion. The same public that adores a hero, that same public that idolizes a hero, that same public that go mad about some hero, some personality, some leader. It does not take a long time for the same public to change its opinion. Okay, so an old story in the sense, this particular poem has a universal relevance. It has universal application because throughout the world, across generations, the history has seen the rise and fall of heroes. Okay, so you can look at the subtitle in this way. There's another way of looking at this subtitle, kids, and the other way is probably the Robert Browning has given this subtitle An Old Story because this poem seems to echo the story of Christ, who came to Jerusalem sitting on a donkey as the Prince of Peace. Okay, and then a trial was held. Okay, he was condemned. Okay, and he was sentenced to death. So on Sunday he walked into Jerusalem, and then the trial was held. The Last Supper took place on Thursday. On Friday he was crucified, and then on Sunday he was resurrected. Okay, so this particular poem echoes that old story of Christ, how he was welcomed into Jerusalem as a hero, as a Messiah, as the chosen one, the Son of God, the Prince of Peace. However, within no time he was condemned, and then he was crucified. So it echoes that story. So the subtitle can be looked at in two ways. Please do remember that. Okay, now let's move on with the first stanza of this particular poem. So it reads like this: it was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path like mad. The housetops seemed to heave and sway, the church spires flamed, such flags they had a year ago on this very day. So this line is interesting. A year ago on this very day. So the setting of this poem, kids, the setting is a normal street, okay, and this guy, the patriot. Now who is a patriot? A patriot is someone who loves his country, who is willing to fight for his country, who is willing to defend his country, and someone for whom his country is right on top. Okay, and so it was. So the setting I was talking about, the setting is basically a particular street in a town. Okay, and this guy, the patriot, is being led to the gallows. He is being led to a place where he will be executed. Okay, and his situation is very, very bad. Okay, he's in a miserable condition, and then he is thinking back about the way he was welcomed into the same street, the way he walked on that same path on the day a year ago. Okay, a year ago he was felicitated, he was welcomed, his entry was celebrated, but right now he is walking towards the gallows to be executed. Okay, so it's like a flashback. He's thinking about his welcome. So how was the patriot welcomed? So well, the patriot was welcomed in the sense the people, they put roses along his path, and the roses were mixed with myrtle. So now again, rose, the word roses. Roses are symbolic of what? Roses are symbolic of love. A rose is also symbolic of appreciation. A rose is also symbolic of gratitude. And also myrtle is a symbol of purity. Myrtle can also be a symbol of love. And remember that myrtles have a lovely fragrance. Okay. So when the patriot was walking down the path, there were a lot of roses with myrtle that was strewn on the path. Okay. So this goes on to show what? This goes on to show the love the people had for him, and the fact that they thought that he was an honored individual. They were honored to, they felt honored to welcome him. They felt honored to welcome him. So it was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path like mad. So this particular poem starts with visual imagery. A beautiful visual imagery is drawn, wherein you can see in your mind's eye the patriot walking down the path, and the path is full of roses, the path is full of myrtle. And remember that myrtle has a certain fragrance, a certain smell. Okay, so it also appeals to your sense of smell. So it was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path. Now like mad, this particular word reveals what? That the crowd was very, very excited. It was like a state of frenzy. Okay, and they were elated. They were really happy to see the patriot. And there was this certain tumult, there was certain madness in that particular situation. And mad also reveals the enthusiasm of the crowd, of the public at that particular point of time. Now, you have to imagine the situation in your mind, and which is pretty simple. The house roofs seem to heave and sway. So what do you mean by heave? What do you mean by sway? So look at my chest. The rise and fall. The rise and fall of my chest means I am heaving, and swaying means rocking in this way. Okay? Side to side, rocking side to side. Okay, so the house roof seemed to heave and sway. Why did it seem like that? Well, it seemed like that because a lot of people, they were so excited that the Patriot had entered their town that they clambered onto the roofs of the houses. They were jostling and pushing one another to get a glimpse, to get a look at the Patriot. So that was the level of excitement. Okay, the church spires flamed. Such flags they had. So there were flags all over the place. And what do you mean by a church spire? It's like a conical structure. A conical structure on the roofs of churches. So the church spires flame. So there were a lot of bright flags on the spires of the churches, okay, that made the church spires glow with brightness. It was as if the church spires were lit up. So the church spires flamed. Such flags they had. So there were a lot of flags as well to welcome the Patriot. Okay, so just imagine the Patriot walking down the path, and there are people on rooftops who are jostling, who are pushing one another to see him. There are people crying, shouts and all. So imagine the feeling that the Patriot must have had while walking down that path. So the house roof seemed to heave and sway. The church spires flamed. Why flamed? Because of the bright flags that were put atop the spires of the churches. Such flags they had a year ago. So now this gives us a sense, or gives us an understanding that he is reminiscing about the past. He is thinking back in time about that day when he was welcomed with pomp and ceremony, when he was welcomed with open arms by the public of that particular place. Okay, so remember that he's being led right now. The situation is he's being led to the gallows. Okay, also just remember the rhyme scheme. Rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, A. Okay, so this is the rhyme scheme that's followed throughout this particular poem. Okay, so let's keep it at this as of now. Okay, so now the air broke into a mist. Okay, so the church spires, the house roofs where people are present, the roses, the myrtle. So the poet Robert Browning has made good, effective use of visual imagery. And then now, if you look at the way these particular stanzas are numbered, they are numbered using Roman numerals. So you might ask yourself, why is it that Robert Browning has chosen to use these Roman numerals to number these stanzas? Well, a few people say that these Roman numerals denote the chapters in the Patriot's life. But I don't quite find a lot of merit in that argument, in that interpretation. So don't read it like that. Okay, the Roman numerals are there. So let's just keep it at that. Don't read too much into it. Okay, fine. So now air broke into a mist with bells. So I'm sure you can imagine, okay, the picture of the patriots welcome into the city. So the air broke into a mist with bells. Okay, so there were bells that were rung to welcome the patriot. So this is an example of what imagery? Auditory imagery, where this particular line appeals to our sense of hearing. Remember, imagery, okay, visual imagery, auditory imagery, tactile imagery, gustatory imagery, olfactory imagery. So I hope all you know about these things. Okay, so the air broke into a mist with bells, the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. So here now the old walls. So how do we know? So we get an understanding of that place through this word old. Okay, so the old walls means it was a place where the houses were old, and it wasn't it wasn't a place where very rich people resided. So here we are talking about the ordinary man, okay, the everyday man. So the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. So here an inanimate object like a wall is said to be rocking. But rocking with what? Rocking, it seems as if the old walls were rocking because of the crowd that was present out there, and also people were screaming and shouting the patriot's name. They were praising him. So there is this picture drawn of a situation, of a scene where an individual's entry, okay, is being greeted with a lot of fanfare, with a lot of excitement by the public. So the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. Okay, and then interesting, and at that point of time, if the patriot would have said, had I said good folk, mere noise repels, means he's not really happy with so much of noise. Okay, repels in the sense it pushes him back. He's not quite interested in the noise. Okay, good folk, mere noise repels, but give me your sun from yonder skies. So if he would have, but give me your sun from yonder skies, they had answered, and afterward what else? So the public, they were so taken in by the patriot, they so looked up to him, they had placed him on a pedestal. It was like the patriot was like the hero, and in a way we get a sense of hero worship. Okay, so at that point of time, if he would have asked for the sun, now the sun is symbolic of what? The sun is symbolic of honor. The sun is symbolic of timelessness. Okay, and the sun is also symbolic of what? Something that's unachievable. So he said that at that point of time, okay, I held so much of, the patriot held so much of sway, so much of control over the public of that place, that if he would have requested, or if he would have told them that get me the sun, okay, the people would have gotten the sun probably, okay, and the people would have then gone on to ask him, what else do you need? So here now, if you look at it, remember we are talking about a mob, means a group of people. Now this goes on to show, so when the patriot made this unachievable request, the request to get the sun, okay, the mob comes across as thoughtless, okay, because the mob knows that it is a very unreasonable request, but despite that, they ask the patriot, is that it? They tell the patriot that, is that it? Do you want more? This goes on to show the thoughtless nature of the crowd, okay, and crowds, remember, can do the unthinkable, and this particular line, but give me your sun from yonder skies, also reveals something about the speakers or the narrator's mindset, that he wants to be in the minds of the people for a long time. He wants his popularity to perhaps to live down the ages. So there is this need, there is this hunger in the patriot for fame that lasts, for popularity that lasts over time or through generations. So please do remember that. Okay, so then let's move on to the third stanza. Alak means alas. So this is an interjection, this is an expression of sorrow. Alak, it was I who leaped at the sun. Interesting. I who leaped at the sun. Now this out here, I who leaped at the sun, the patriot says that he was the one who actually went and he tried to achieve the impossible. And for whom? For the people who were there. Okay, so here remember, this particular line is an allusion to the story of Icarus. Now, Icarus so we have the story of Daedalus and Icarus. So Icarus was Daedalus' son. And here we are talking about Greek mythology. So they were prisoners in the island of Crete, whose king was King Minos. So they did not know what to do. So since it was an island, there was water on all sides. So they wanted to escape. So what Daedalus did was, he made wings out of the feathers of birds, and he glued the wings using wax. Okay, so he made these wings for Icarus, he made wings for himself, and then before they took off, okay, he warned Icarus to maintain his line of path, not to go close to the sun. Okay, but Icarus, when they started flying, Icarus got so lost. He got so taken in by the act of flying that he did not heed. He did not remember his father's advice, and then he went close to the sun, because of which the wax that glued the feathers together, the wax melted, and then he plunged to his death. Okay, so what does that? So ambition. So how can you read it? Ambition can have unexpected consequences. Okay, so remember, this is an allusion. So we've already spoken about the reference. Okay, or we've already spoken about an old story being an echo of Christ's entry into Jerusalem and his subsequent condemnation and crucifixion. Here we have another reference to Icarus, who went close to the sun, because of which the wax in his wings melted and he plunged to his death. So likewise, this particular patriot, okay, he was very overambitious, and he wanted to achieve the impossible for the public, because of which, okay, he, as of now, remember, is being led to the gallows. He is about to be executed. And now remember that things are, in a dramatic monologue, kids, things are not quite what they seem. So we don't really know what is it that the patriot did for which he is being punished. So that we have no clue about that. We can just guess. Okay, but if you look at this particular line, it was I who leaped at the sun to give it my loving friends to keep. So this could be a case of personal ambition, wherein he wanted to achieve something for himself, but you can see a sense, wherein you can see a sense of self-justification. The patriot is trying to justify his ambition. The patriot is trying to justify himself by saying that, yes, I leaped to get the sun. I leaped to achieve the impossible. However, nevertheless, the reason why he did was, he did it because he did it for the public, whom he calls his loving friends. So there is a note of self-justification in this particular line. Okay, so not man, not means nothing, not man could do have I left undone. So he did everything that was possible, okay, for any man to do for his people, for any leader to do for his people, okay. And you see my harvest, what I reap. So despite or in spite of doing so much for the public, for his people, there is this sarcastic tone out here. The irony being this, that despite doing so much for the public, what is the harvest that he reaps? What is his reward? His reward is a sense of ingratitude. He has been condemned to death. That is his reward. It is not something that he expected. He expected the people to glorify him. He expected the people to praise him. He expected the people to remember him for that attempt of his to get the impossible. So yeah, this can be seen as a metaphor of he did what he did for the public, but what has he gotten in return? Well, he has gotten nothing but death in return, infamy in return, sorrow in return, punishment in return. So, and you see my harvest, what I reap, this very day now a year is done. So, on this very day a year is done. So it means that he was welcomed exactly a year back. So this is like the anniversary of his welcome. So think about the way things have changed for this patriot. His rise and his subsequent fall, his subsequent downfall. In the span of 1 year, kids, okay, he rose, as in he was adulated, he was looked up to by the public, and now at this point of time, what is the harvest that he has reaped? He has reaped the harvest of his death. Means he is about to die. He is being led to the gallows. So do remember that. So all this while, what we were dwelling on the past that the patriot was thinking about. Okay, so now we move to the present. So in this particular poem, the past and the present, they are merged or they are combined in a very, very beautiful, effective manner. And one also gets to see the contrast now. This, remember, I've already spoken about juxtaposition, where out here juxtaposition is basically where two things are placed side by side to compare and contrast for us to get a better understanding of the situation. So the situation that was there a year ago, now the situation is very, very different. A year ago he was welcomed, but what is the situation in the present? In the past he was welcomed, but the situation now in the present is very, very different. So in the past, where the roads were thronging with people, there were people on the rooftops screaming out his name, okay, pushing one another to get a glimpse, to catch a glimpse of the patriot. But now the situation is very, very different. The present situation, kids, is different in the sense there's nobody on the housetops now. There's no one there. Okay? And he's walking, remember, towards the gallows. Just a palsied few at the window set. Just a few sickly people are sitting. They're looking through the window. They're looking at the patriot. Okay, heading towards the gallows. For the best of the sight is all allowed. So the best sight, everyone believes, everyone knows in that place that the best sight is at the gallows or at the place where he will be executed. Okay, at the shambles gate is probably it's the gate. Okay, it's the place of his execution. Let's look at it that way. So at the shambles gate, or better yet, by the scaffold's foot. Scaffold is a platform on which prisoners are hanged, okay, till they die. So, by the scaffold's foot I trow means believe, B-I-L-I-E, we believe. So, the people, for they were hungry, they really wanted to see the condemned patriot, the patriot being executed. So, many of the able-bodied men, children, women, they rushed, they were where? They were at the place of the execution. So, who was left there? Only a few sickly people were left in that same, in the houses of the same street where he was welcomed a year ago. So by the scaffold's foot I trow believe. Okay, so we've done that. Let's move on. Okay, to the fifth stanza. I go in the rain, and more than needs a rope cuts. So I go in the rain. So here, if you think about this poem, in the sense that if you tell yourself that the patriot is innocent, okay, the patriot is not to blame, okay, and the patriot has been wrongfully condemned and put to death, then the rain could perhaps serve as a symbol of something that washes him or that makes him pure, that washes off his sins. Okay, so before he dies, the rain in a way washes off his sins. You can look at it that way, or the rain is purifying him before he meets his death. I go in the rain, and more than needs a rope cuts both my wrists behind, so his hands are tied behind his back. So here we have we have something called tactile imagery at work, wherein we too, the readers, to feel the rope cutting his hands. So this particular line, a rope cuts both my wrists behind, it appeals to your sense of touch. You too can feel the rope cutting through his hands. And I think by the feel my forehead bleeds. Why by the feel? Because he can't quite touch his forehead. Remember, his hands are tied behind his back. So he also feels that his forehead is bleeding. So again, another use of tactile imagery. So when the poet writes by forehead bleeds, even we can feel, okay, the blood on the forehead of the patriot. So again another example of tactile imagery. And I think by the feel my forehead bleeds. Why is his forehead bleeding? For they fling whoever has a mind. So whoever wants to. So there are a lot of people out there who are just there to get entertained. So despite the plight, despite the pain and suffering of the patriot, okay, they want to inflict more suffering on him by throwing stones at him. So there is no empathy, there is no feeling felt by the public for this particular patriot. Okay, that is the reason why the particular title too is appropriate, because this particular poem talks about the plight, the pain, the suffering of this particular patriot. Okay, and I think by the feel my forehead bleeds, for they fling, for they throw. So fling, so in poetry you have to be, so since you have to express so much using few words, okay, so when poets choose to use words, they do that very, very carefully. So for they fling, so there's an element of, so there is this idea of violence involved. For they fling, this word is has this thing of violence. So they fling, whoever has a mind, stones at me for my years' misdeeds. For my years' misdeeds. So we don't know whether the patriot was rightfully condemned, or whether he was rightfully blamed, or whether the public misunderstood the patriot, or whether and they blamed him, and he was innocent. We don't know that. Okay, for my years' misdeeds. So 1 year he was, so a year ago, he was welcomed with open arms, and then he tried to leap and get the son for the public, whom he calls his loving friends, okay, but then because of his ambition, okay, it seems he did something that was not right, because of which he was put to trial, okay, and he was sentenced to death. Okay, stones at me for my years misdeed. So let's keep it at that. Okay, thus I entered and thus I go. So again, thus I entered. So look at the contrast here. So the way he entered that particular place, and look at how he is leaving that particular place. Remember, it's the same place. The setting is the same. The path is the same. So earlier the path was strewn with roses, was strewn with myrtle, but here he is being thrown stones at by those very people. So stones are okay. So thus I enter, thus I go. So look at the contrast. Look at the difference between how he enters and how he is walking down the same road to meet his death. So this out here is an example of antithesis. This is another literary device, okay, showing a contrast. Okay, in triumphs people have dropped down dead. So public opinion is not fair. Okay, the greatest leaders in their biggest victories, in their greatest victories, they have found their bitterest defeats. Okay, so that is the sense of it. In triumphs people have dropped down dead. So so even if people or leaders are victorious, they do something great for the public, but for all you know, okay, the tide of public opinion could change in no time, and that public opinion can be unfair. So that is my reading of this particular line. In triumphs people have dropped down dead. Paid by the world, what dost thou owe me? Me God might question. So now, as in there is, so he has been as in the people have what did he get in return for all that he did for the public? He only has received pain and suffering and condemnation, and he has also been sentenced to death. So now his only hope is in God's court, where he feels that the patriot feels. So the sense of it is that the patriot, I suppose, feels that he has been wrongfully accused and condemned by the public, but the all-knowing God Almighty, okay, knows that perhaps the patriot is innocent. God Almighty knows everything. So he will be rightfully judged by God in his court, in God's court. So even in this particular situation where he is about to die, okay, he achieves a victory. He achieves a moral victory, telling himself that what has happened, and since the public could not understand me, they have wrongfully judged me or him, but he expects justice at God's court. He expects God to deal with him fairly. Okay, and God might question. So God might ask him that you have already been paid for. You have already reaped your reward. You've already reaped your harvest. Okay, on earth, what more can God do for the patriot? But the patriot feels that God can rightfully judge him. God is the only one, the only supreme being who will give him justice. So God might question, now instead, "'tis God shall repay, I am safer so." So there is this sense of irony out here. Now what is the irony? The irony being that just a year ago, okay, he was treated well by the public, and in no time at all he has been condemned and sentenced to death. And in fact, in his death, he feels safe. So that is the irony that is there in the poem. So the tone of the poem. So in the beginning, okay, the tone is celebratory, okay, but towards the end, okay, the tone is sad, but despite that, okay, despite the sadness, there is this element of faith in God, okay, that is very much there in the Patriot. And so we don't know a lot about the Patriot in the sense, why did he leap at the sun? He leapt at the sun, okay, because he wanted to achieve the impossible for his people. But remember, that could be an example of personal ambition. Okay, he tried to justify his personal ambition, and ambition is rooted in pride. So now, remember the motive or the intention, kids, of the dramatic monologue. Okay, so the dramatic monologue basically is a poem where the speaker speaks, and we get to know a lot about the speakers, and the speakers are not perfect human beings. The speakers are flawed, okay, they have internal inconsistencies, okay, so through their speech itself, we get an understanding of the character, the nature of the speaker. Out here, what I would like you to pay close attention to is that because the intent, because we don't know for sure, remember, we've only understood his side of the story. We don't know the other side of the story. So though you might feel that the Patriot has been wrongfully accused, yes, it's all about the rise and fall of heroes, okay, but remember that that is an assumption that we have, because we are only listening to, or we've only heard or read about his side of the story. So in a given situation, kids, okay, there are many things possible. So the poet Robert Browning has also in a way urged us to question our assumptions about people and situations. Let's keep it at this. And what about the themes? Well, the themes, the first theme, which is obvious, is the fickleness of public opinion. Public opinion can change in no time whatsoever, okay. And the second theme, an important theme, is there is this sense of optimism, despite the suffering, despite the pain that the Patriot feels, not only physically. Remember, his forehead is bleeding, his hands are tied behind his back to a point where they are cutting his wrists. He's feeling that pain, but that emotional pain as well, okay. So despite the emotional pain, okay, despite feeling let down by the public, this poem ends on a note of optimism. Optimism in what? Optimism in God's justice, in God's sense of right and wrong. So these are the two themes, the fickleness of public opinion, number one, number two being there's this sense of optimism, where even in times of despair, if one has faith, that faith can see you through your times of despair. There is a bit more that I would like to talk about. So remember, when you study this poem, you go through the literary devices. The literary devices are important. So you have nice use of alliteration out here, and then you have imagery. You have all sorts of imagery used here. You have kinesthetic imagery, tactile imagery, auditory, visual imagery used here. And then remember allusions, okay, the allusion to Icarus, okay, and there's another reference to Christ entering Jerusalem. Remember that, okay, and remember the metaphor of the harvest, his reaping the harvest. So remember that. And when you return, if you have more questions, we will go through this poem once more, not at length, but maybe there are a few things I left out, and we'll talk about that later. Bye for now.